each other, finding each other using your DNS service. Now you move them to the cloud. Now you're riding on the bus. You're taking public transportation, and you're sharing resources, including DNS, with everybody else. And that means you can't trust that DNS server the way you used to. So we will see new kinds of vulnerabilities, maybe the kinds of vulnerabilities that existed before, but they're accentuated in different ways when people move to the cloud. And so I think it is important to acknowledge those differences and to not just keep trying to poke holes in the virtualization layer. I think that we're going to find bugs in the virtualization layer, but it's not the most exciting part of the cloud computing story. The second, and I think maybe, well, the rumblings I've heard coming the most strongly about how to address cloud is to scrutinize the cloud providers. Because we used to keep these things under our control, and now we're going to put them under the control of a cloud provider. You really have to trust that cloud provider. And maybe we should come up with a really long list of things that that cloud provider has to do. I recommend against this approach. It's absolutely true that you have to trust your cloud provider. It's also absolutely true that because the cloud provider wants your money, you could come up with a really long list of hoops for them to jump through, and they'll sign up to do all of it. Whether they'll actually do it all or not, I don't know, but they'll sign up to do it. And by doing so, they will lock you in. The cloud providers are only too happy to come up with it to meet all of your very specific needs and then give you no alternative when it's time to renew your contract about where you take your business. I think that works against one of the primary benefits that people are hoping to get out of cloud, and that's this massive cost reduction. You don't get massive cost reduction from putting requirements on your vendors until there's only one vendor left. You get massive cost reduction from the ability to choose from a whole lot of vendors. So, what does that mean? What that means, if we need the security, if we're not willing to compromise on the security, but we're not willing to pile all kinds of esoteric requirements on the cloud provider, what we've got to emphasize is building the security into the software. If you build robust software, you can take that software to any provider. You still need them to meet a minimum bar. I'm not saying that the cloud providers can, say, be crooks. You still need to trust those cloud providers. But if you can keep from putting tons and tons of requirements on them by building software that you can take and trust, then you can recognize the cloud vision, reduce cost, instant gratification. I think we have a very good story to tell about cloud computing, and that jibes very well with the OWASP mission about helping people build software they can trust. Okay, so I'm going to go on with the rest of my talk here and talk about one way to do that, and that's watching software run. So if you've seen me give a talk before, you've seen this slide before. So this is Petrosky. It's a quote from his book, To Engineer is Human. To Engineer is Human is not about security. It's not really particularly about software. It's just about building stuff. And what Petrosky says is, if you want to build something successfully, you need to understand how you're likely to fail. You need to know where the landmines are if you hope to avoid them. This could just as well be OWASP's mantra. I mean, you think about the OWASP Top 10, this is exactly what it is. It's a list of ways that you might fail. Why do you need to know about them? You need to understand them so that you can avoid them. Same trick with scanning a website for vulnerabilities or analyzing code looking for vulnerabilities. It's all about understanding what might make that code weak and then looking for ways to avoid those problems. So I've spent all of my time at Fortify basically operating, and it's until fairly recently, operating under this mantra, is that if we can help people think about how they might fail, then we can help them avoid failure. Okay, so that has sparked quite a bit of interest in secure software development lifecycle. And here I'll put up just two examples, McGraw's software security book with his touch points, and the Microsoft secure development lifecycle stuff along the bottom. Recently, I anyway, have moved away from thinking about just life cycle to projects like SAM or BSIM, where we're thinking about how to build an entire software security initiative. But the idea is the same, which is if you build the security in, then you won't have to think, or you won't have to let your hair on fire in order to fix it up later. That's the basic concept. Where did we get that concept from? Who brought us that concept? Yeah, there are a couple of guys with books up here, but I'd give credit to one guy who really got us going on this trail. It's a guy we've been reacting to for 10 years at least. I'd say it's this guy. This guy became, for a while anyway, the richest guy in the world by doing exactly the opposite. He said, no, security, in fact, doesn't matter for an operating system, and it's totally cool for me to ship you Windows 95 and for it to be full of holes, and you'll pay me for it anyway. In fact, he basically single-handedly created a security aftermarket, right? That security would be handled by a bunch of vendors after you bought a bad product where you're going to handle security by fixing it up. And we came together and said, if nothing else, that feels wrong. Now, it turns out it's also really expensive, but I would say more than anything else, we started with, that's just not the right way to go. We need to start thinking about how do we build security in. And so we've been very much focused on what kinds of things do you need to do throughout the development life cycle, what kind of pitfalls do you need to avoid. And I would say, in some sense, we've stayed there for a good decade or so. So what I want to talk about today is moving beyond that defect concept. So I want to present 3 ideas to you, and then I'll show you the practical implications in the work that I've been doing at Fortify over the last year or so about how we came to try and make use of these observations. So the first is that we're pretty good at coming from behind, and it turns out it's not just because of a tectonic shift. We need to be good at coming from behind. The second is that the bad guys have an advantage that we don't often recognize, and that is time travel. And I'll explain that to you in just a minute. And thirdly, we're best off not just building security in, but building in security we can take with us. I'll explain what I mean too. Recognize that guy? That's the Tick. I guess I already recommended a couple of books. I'll recommend The Tick then too. If you're looking for a new comic book, go seek out The Tick. The Tick is great. He's got a battle cry. His battle cry is spoon, and it means nothing. But he's a caricature of a lot of other superheroes, and so he had to have a battle cry. So if we had a battle cry, if the security professional had a battle cry, what do you think when we entered the fray? What do we say? I'll tell you my idea. You can tell me yours maybe over lunch. I think our battle cry would be, "You should have called me yesterday." Yeah? Does that sound familiar? Okay. So let me tell you why they didn't call us yesterday, and I'll use as my example Twitter. So you might have noticed that 2009 was very kind to Twitter in some ways. From a security perspective, not so kind at all to Twitter. Okay, so here's what happened to Twitter in 2009. If you think about risk over time, they had an amazing risk reduction year. Because all of a sudden, major news organizations said Twitter is a legitimate way to be communicating news, and an important way to be communicating news. The market risk for their business plunged because they became a household name. That was a really, really good year, and it happened